I'm Amanda McGill Johnson with Nebraska Coalition for Life-Saving Cures. Our organization promotes, supports, and advocates for health science research for the betterment of our health and our economy. And this is Talking Research, a series where we bring you a Nebraska scientist and highlight the really cool research that's happening in our state. And today we have Dr. Ann Anderson Berry with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, she wears a lot of hats. She's the Vice Chair of Research at the Department of Pediatrics and the Executive Director of Child Health Research Institute at UNMC, and is also the Vice President of Research for Children's Hospital and Medical Center. For those of you who are joining us live, feel free to put questions you might have for Dr. Anderson Berry in the comments, and I'll be monitoring them as we have our discussion over the next 30 minutes or so. Let's start with some of the basics. I think that most people realize that what a mother eats and her health might be can impact fetal development. What aspects of that perinatal nutrition does your research focus on?
Yeah, so my group really focuses on fatty molecules that have the potential to modulate inflammation. And so those specifically are a group of vitamins and molecules like vitamin A, beta carotene, other carotenoids. So if you think about eating your vegetables, and you've heard probably to eat a rainbow of fruits and vegetables, the carotenoids are part of the molecules that make those colors, the rainbow. And so there really is scientific linkage to eating that rainbow and getting a variety of those anti-inflammatory molecules into your diet. We're also interested in vitamin E-based molecules, so the kinds of things that you would get from nuts and from spinach and from eggs. And then we're interested in the omega-3 compounds. And so you've heard that fatty fish can be very, very helpful for heart health and health during pregnancy, setting aside mercury contamination from some large ocean fish. And so those are the types of molecules that we think can help modulate inflammation, which can lead to bad outcomes for pregnant women and for their babies. And so we study a wide array of those in the diet in women who are delivering here in Omaha.
What are some of like the ahas from your research, or like the key pieces you would want folks to know about?
Yeah, I think, it sounds so simple, but you've heard you are what you eat, and your baby is what you eat as well. And so the body and the placenta are pretty miraculous in sifting and sorting to try to build the healthiest baby, even if mom has medical concerns. But when we get down to these micronutrients, if they're not in the mom's body, they can't get across the placenta and impact fetal development. And so a few of the aha moments is associations with these micronutrients. So we call the macronutrients the fats, the carbohydrates, and the proteins. These are micronutrients. So we need them in much smaller degrees and concentrations, but they still have an impact in how your baby grows, both weight, length, and very importantly, head circumference. And they have an impact in the quality of pregnancy and health. And so we think about that as, does a mom develop high blood pressure during pregnancy? And that can lead to early delivery. It can lead to many complications in mom, including worst case scenario seizures. It can lead to a tendency to have association with delivering by C-section instead of having a natural birth, which brings in a whole other group of consequences for both the mom and the baby. So I think it's been very interesting to show association after association with these molecules in really important outcomes for maternal and fetal health. There's some other really concerning associations that our group has described, and that has to do with the disparities that we see in access to healthcare and in access to transportation and in access to food in Omaha. And so one of those is around the concept of a food desert. A food desert is when you live in an area that is not served by a full service grocery store. And there are several different definitions of food deserts, whether you're a half mile or a mile. If you're in a rural locations. So we have a lot of rural deliveries here in Nebraska. A food desert can be described as 5, 10, or 20 miles if you think about really far out in Western Nebraska. But however you define it, we have shown associations with living in a food desert and micronutrient deficiencies that then can show association with untoward outcomes of pregnancy. And so it's not only your baby is what you eat, but it could be your baby is where you live. And so we need to think about this not only as a clinician. I take care of babies who are sick. I'm a neonatologist. I work with a lot of maternal fetal medicine and obstetrician specialists who deliver the babies and care for the mom during complicated pregnancies. But we also have to think about this from a public health perspective, right? How are we building our cities? How are we providing resources to our families, to our children, to our pregnant women in all parts of Omaha and in all parts of Nebraska so that they have access to the things that can make them healthy?
What are some of the best foods that have all of these micronutrients in it that we want them to have access to?
Yeah. Well, they're really tasty foods. Some of them, might be the foods that your kids don't love initially, but you keep trying and their palates grow. Hopefully by the time you're pregnant, you've developed your palate to embrace some of these foods. But, a lot of the low hanging fruits, the best yummy things for a healthy diet when we get into thinking about the carotenoids and vitamin A and beta carotene are, things like spinach, carrots, tomatoes, blueberries, raspberries, anything with those dark, deep colors. You can get them from your spinaches. So if you shop fresh, then you're going to have a much higher likelihood of getting those carotenoids and those vitamin A's and beta carotene. Then to get into the vitamin E's, this is where you have to understand some of the nuances of the vitamins. So there's a lot of different forms of the vitamins. And for vitamin E, you can get the alpha form from nuts, from eggs, again, from spinach. You can get the gamma form from fried foods because that gamma form comes from our oils, our vegetable oils, and our fried fatty foods and our fast foods. And so some of the nuances that we're looking at are what's the proportion of that alpha, where we're getting those from fresh foods that you'd buy in the grocery store, as compared to the gamma, where we're getting that from our fast food based sources and our processed food, the pizzas and the pizza rolls and, the things that you'd pop in from the freezer into your oven, the things that kids kind of like to eat, unfortunately. And so we don't just have to look at how much of the alpha, that really nutritious anti-inflammatory intake you're getting, but that can be offset. If you take in a lot of gamma, you mess up your ratio, and then you're still finding yourself in a pro-inflammatory state, which can lead to poor consequences as opposed to an anti-inflammatory state, which we think leads to better health outcomes. And then the final category that we're interested in is those omega-3 fatty acids. And so you're going to see those mostly from those great fatty fishes. Everybody automatically goes to salmon, sardines, not a lot of Midwesterners, have an abundance of these in their diet, but they're things that you can learn to love. And they're more and more available in flash frozen foods that you can pick up at the grocery store, learn how to cook 2 or 3 different ways and incorporate those into your diet 1 or 2 times a week. You'll make a big impact, particularly in your vascular health, which is a really big driver of pregnancy outcomes, is how your vascular and cardiovascular health work.
How do prenatal vitamins play into this in terms of when a mother's pregnant? They're important. Do we depend too much on those as opposed to getting them from the fresh fruits and vegetables, et cetera?
Yeah, so prenatal vitamins are going to be absolutely critical for pregnancy outcomes. In particular, your vitamins are going Oh, well, feedback. You're going to get your folic acid, which is going to help that baby's spinal cord fuse and develop normally. So prenatal vitamins are essential. Also, you're going to get some vitamin D and prenatal vitamins that you might not be optimizing here in Nebraska as well. And you might be getting some DHA if you have that specific brand of prenatal vitamin. Some brands don't supplement DHA and ARA, and some brands do. So that's a plus minus. What you're not going to get in the prenatal vitamins are the nutrients that I've been talking about that we research in our lab. You really got to get those for the most part from foods. You can buy some individual supplementations, lutein and zeaxanthine, beta carotene. That's a really expensive, artificial, and I would say suspect way to get your micronutrients, because if you're getting them from food, they're going to balance out. You're going to get nice proportions of them. If you are just taking one or two supplements, you're not going to get that rainbow of micronutrients that we really are talking about, that are going to hit across a broad spectrum of cascades at a cellular level that are really going to impact health. So our group doesn't recommend supplements, or if we do, it's as a last resort. We think food is the best way to get your nutrition. But take your folic acid, take your prenatal vitamins, because that is really critical to health.
Okay, perfect. One of your areas of interest also relates to opioid use and the impacts of that. Can you talk to me a little bit about the impacts on brain development, both short-term and long-term?
Yeah, so we know that the opioid crisis is amongst us here in Nebraska, and we see a lot of women doing the right thing by trying to kick their addiction and transition into medical therapy. But we still see a lot of women who are on daily medical therapy, or still, having to use an opioid at a regular basis, and some women who are still having an addiction and are in that use category become pregnant. And we want to support them and their babies. And what we know from mouse models, my collaborator, Guru Pendiala, uses mouse and rat models, is that dams who are associated with opioid exposure while they are pregnant have rat pups whose brains are much smaller, and they are less well developed at term when they're delivered. And then they also have difficulties as they move forward, difficulties with organizing and difficulties with like completing tasks in a maze. What I see as a neonatologist when I'm taking care of babies who have opioid exposure is that these babies aren't able to self-soothe. They have difficulty getting to sleep. They have difficulty staying asleep. They have a lot of difficulty with tremors, shaking, and jitteriness. They have difficulties with their feeding. They either want to eat too much, and they give themselves vomiting and diarrhea and get electrolyte abnormalities, or they can't organize and they want to eat, but they can't actually get that suck, swallow, breathe down. So they're not able to even get the food in a consistent manner. And these symptoms can wax and wane. So we don't see it immediately after birth, depending on how much opioid they were exposed to in utero and the type. Some long acting, some short acting. Their symptoms can come, within 5 or 6 hours after delivery, or 2 or 3 days after delivery. And so it's a really challenging patient population to work with. And we're trying to understand with my research on a couple of different levels. How do we best care for these babies in the NICU? We don't want to give them more drugs to help them with their withdrawal. We'd like to do environmental and parental care and nursing care things to help them be comfortable and get through this, so we don't have to expose their brains to more drug. We're also my team's working to understand prescribing patterns of opioids across the state of Nebraska. So if we're seeing a code for a pregnant mom with a code for an opioid prescription, we would love to talk with those providers and provide some education around the risks of that, because there are other opportunities to treat these moms. And I think if moms knew that this was a risky medicine for their babies, they wouldn't take it, right? If we can avoid the the addiction, if we can avoid that dependence by preventing those first prescriptions, we can really alter a lot of these pathways. And so, and then we're also, we have another grant where we're looking at the impact of opioid dependence on maternal depression and anxiety. Because if you can imagine, I think everybody should have heard by now of perinatal depression. It's a very difficult time to have a baby. And, you can become depressed or anxious during pregnancy, around the delivery period, and up to a year after the delivery period. And if you can imagine, add on to that a substance use disorder, and all of the things that go with that, which can include housing insecurity, transportation insecurity, job insecurity. You may not have a phone. A lot of these things can compound. And so we're really interested in how we can support moms through what we believe is the potential for augmented anxiety and perinatal depression. That's something that we're really interested in, because if we can treat those, we know that moms will have a better outcome. And we also know that babies will have a better outcome from a developmental standpoint through their life course.
Do you know much about, so say a mother with an addiction, is first identified early in the pregnancy, there are some interventions to hopefully help provide
There
alternatives
are.
that could, so maybe a mother is using the first couple of months, but if she's
Yes.
able to
So if
transition
she gets a prescription early in pregnancy, but she has not developed dependence, that's the best case scenario. So we get her off of that, and no more exposure, and really she can expect to have a pretty normal pregnancy. For moms that come into pregnancy with a dependence, the thinking is we're not going to safely get that mom off of opioids, but we can transition her to medical therapy. And so that is a prolonged opioid given under medical therapy on a daily basis in a very structured way that has been shown to minimize the total exposure of opioids and provide that in a safe environment so that she doesn't have to go searching for alternative sources of opioids, which I don't know if your viewers know this, but they're incredibly dangerous right now. Street opioids are more and more often across the country and here in Nebraska laced with fentanyl, and it is causing deaths. It is an incredibly scary time to purchase any opioid off the street. And it's something that law enforcement, healthcare professionals, and people across the state are really worried about, because it's literally a deadly situation. So we don't want to send anybody, but particularly a pregnant mom, to search for opioids from that type of an environment. And so if we can support her with medically assisted therapy and get her in a dependence program, get her the support she needs, she's going to have a much more likelihood of having a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. That baby still will be at risk for withdrawal. And so neonatologists still need to work with that family to ensure that that baby goes through that period where they're at risk for withdrawal safely, gets the treatment that they need. Hopefully it's environmental and supportive therapy. We do have to use opioids sometimes when the withdrawal is bad, and we're trained to do that.
Yeah, okay. We can move on to hopefully maybe some other forms of research, maybe more pleasant.
Yeah.
But you recently became the executive director of the Child Health Research Institute. Just tell me about some of the priorities there that maybe you haven't already discussed.
Absolutely. Well, this is a really unique opportunity. The Child Health Research Institute is the newest institute at UNMC, and it's part of the NU system, but it is also a CHMC, Children's Hospital and Medical Center Research Institute. So I bridge two phenomenal institutions, and I get to help other researchers to leverage the best of a freestanding children's hospital and the patient population that they serve with the amazing things that we can do at Children's Hospital and Medical Center with all of the resources that we have at UNMC, which is a major academic research institution. And so I can bring together the best of clinicians and clinical scientists with our bench researchers. Being part of the NU system leads us into research collaboratives with UNL, UNO, and UNK. And it really gives us stature across the state to impact child health. And so our goal, our mission, and our vision is to improve the health of every child through research, to optimize a research environment for investigators so that they can do impactful research and improve child health. We have to do the research, and then we have to get it out to practitioners across the country and across the world. And so as executive director, I get to shepherd all of those activities. It's really a supportive role. I am the person who is charged with helping to build and bring the infrastructure together, help to bring investigators here to Omaha. So I do a lot of recruiting. We're bringing in a lot of really amazing scientists that are going to have impact on our children's lives and children's lives all over the world. And then I get to help connect it. It's like a matchmaker almost. I get to bring engaged minds together and say, hey, you think about this. I've talked to you about that. You think about this. Come together and do that. So we have 6 areas of emphasis. And we bring 40 to 50 scientists together on a quarterly or every other month basis in what we call mini summits. And our next one that we have coming up is led by Dr. Helansky, Dr. Peoples, and Dr. Rizzo, who have very disparate areas of research, but they all kind of coincide around bone health and molecular metabolism. And we're going to talk about pediatric bone health. Dr. Helansky is our division chief for pediatric orthopedics, and he studies in a vitamin D deficient pig model scoliosis. Dr. Rizzo is an internationally renowned metabolic and rare diseases specialist. He's interested in Sjogren-Larsen syndrome and has made life-changing discoveries in that. And then Dr. Peoples is a neonatologist. He's one of my faculty, and he is incredibly interested in hypoxic ischemic brain injury. So when babies have a hard time delivering and they have brain injury, how can we mitigate that? How can we get that brain to heal instead of having those cells die and leading to long-term effects? And so parts of their research all actually coalesce around bone health and early life exposures. And so we're really excited to bring a group. I think we have about 55 scientists registered for that summit. Bring people together. I would say in our other summits, we've had at least 3 or 4 collaborations form and projects that get sparked from just bringing the right minds together. So we're pretty excited for that. We have areas in cancer and cardiovascular health, so congenital heart disease. We have longitudinal diseases, so asthma, cystic fibrosis, kidney disease, population health. We really span the gamut of child health and have the ability to touch children across the country. And then we have a global health emphasis as well. And so we have a very, very active national and international platform, which is quite fun and engaging to be able to see how we can have an impact here at UNMC and Children's for kids across the globe.
That's awesome. We'll have to have you and some of your colleagues back sometime to talk more about those other issues too, or a good panel discussion or something.
They would love that. Absolutely.
How has just conducting research maybe changed since the pandemic? Or like, I know you've been doing some of the vaccine research as well there. And so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I stepped into this role in the interim role in late 2019 and was just kind of hitting my stride. And then March of 2020, I had to shut down all of child research across 2 campuses and communicate why we were doing that, to do that safely, right? So some of our trials could not be shut down because they're children with cancer in our child oncology group. We had Dr. Rizzo, for example, has children literally flying in from all over the world for his clinical trials. that absolutely had to stop. So we had to communicate with those families. You couldn't get flights, you couldn't get passport authorization. We had to understand how that was going to impact things. And then even our basic scientists with our animal models, who's going to care for those animals when we're shutting down a campus, and they have to be fed and they have to be appropriately cared for. So there was a big impact across clinical, translational, and basic science research that really still has repercussions. Many of our scientists are funded on national grants. They have very specific timeframes. So we had to deal with national authorities. Everyone in the country was doing the same thing. So we had to have everyone understand why we were stopping locally, what the rules were on every campus, and what the parameters were, who were those critical personnel that did have campus access to go in and feed and nurture our animals, because we have to have perfect ethics around our animals and our animal support. And so we spent a lot of time with that. And then instantly, the onset of all of the clinical research questions about COVID and how is this going to affect the pediatric population. And as you'll remember, kids in the initial wave were not getting a lot of infections, but we had Miss C, a common complication post-COVID for kids, very quickly here in Omaha. So we had to have some clinical trials and participated in multi-center trials around that. And so we needed to understand, how are we going to do that safely for the kids, for our investigators, for our research staff? Because remember, we didn't have vaccines, and we had very limited personal protective equipment like masks and gloves and gowns. And so we had to be very thoughtful about how we approached each one of those studies. But we had to know, right? Because this is the only way we're going to get to at least where we are today in the pandemic. And then, the vaccine trials came out, and I can tell you that was the biggest relief. When we were selected as a site for the Pfizer vaccine trial for kids aged 6 months to 11 years, there was just an audible sigh of relief on both campuses, because we really wanted to play an impact in prevention. Pediatricians, we treat disease, but you want to get us going, let us prevent disease. Let us start out healthy and let us keep healthy. And so the vaccine trials are just the perfect fit for the Child Health Research Institute. We had literally hundreds to over 1,000 families that wanted their kids enrolled in our studies. We had 50 slots. And so, that was really hard, because we would have loved to enroll every single family in that trial who showed interest. We also had to make sure that we had a diverse enrollment. I think that that's one thing that we haven't touched upon today that is so critical to my mission and the mission of the Child Health Research Institute, UNMC, and Children's, and that's to have very careful attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything we do. Our research subjects, the research studies that we're accepting, our investigators, our coordinators, we really need to be the most inclusive that we can. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. It is my explicitly stated goal that we will get better each and every month and each and every year around that. And so there were a lot of things that went into selecting those subjects and trying to do that in a random but intentional ways, that we met the age criteria and that we met the diversity, equity, inclusion criteria as best that we could. And so that took a lot of time. It was a highly engaged moment. And, we had an incredibly successful site. Pfizer was so happy with our performance. They commented on that multiple times. So great time to talk about that, because just yesterday the vaccine was approved for those 5 to 11-year-olds. And so we couldn't be happier to have been part of that process and to be starting to give shots today. So it really has come full circle in a pretty rapid fire.
So what are you telling families? And there's vaccine hesitancy out there still, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I can sympathize a little bit with parents being concerned about getting something new that is brand new on the market for their students, their kids. So talk to me about what you're telling parents to give them more faith in the process of how this approval has been made.
Yeah, so this study was incredibly well designed. It was highly rigorous. We investigated every sniffle, every sneeze, every cough, every fever, every single thing. If you look at the adverse events in the study, some of them listed are swallowed a penny. We investigated every single thing. I think that we had a broken arm, so we did not ignore anything that was out of the average, perfectly ordinary day for a child. And in the study to date, there's not been any heart inflammation or the pericarditis in this age group. I'm not saying that there won't be when we get this out to hundreds of thousands of people, but I would have zero hesitancy in taking my 5 to 11-year-old today to get a shot. I had a 15-year-old and she got a shot the second that it opened for 15-year-olds. Literally that day, that evening, I found a spot for her. I am 100% convinced of the safety and efficacy of this immunization for our pediatric population. I would hope that you could have a sincere talk with your pediatrician if you have any hesitancy. I think it's normal to question what you're putting into your child's body, but please know that COVID is the 8th leading cause of pediatric death in the United States this year. Over 650 children have died, and they are not children with underlying immune disorders or cerebral palsy or any of the other things. Some of them are your healthy kids who you could not have picked out of a kindergarten class. And we don't want your child to be that 651st death, period. We want to keep them healthy. And as pediatricians, that's our job. And it was a profound experience to be part of the research that can get us to today.
Well, I think this is leaving us with a good place to wrap up, but I do want to give you one more opportunity just to share any other thoughts you have about research or your passion for research and where that came from before we wrap up.
Yeah, I have always been passionate about research. My research career started as a 4th grader. 4th grade was the first time you could enter the science fair in my grade school. And I literally entered the science fair every year from 4th grade through my senior year of high school. It was the best part of my year. It was exciting. It was fun to think of the projects. It was fun to explain what you'd done to the judges. And of course, it was fun to get the ribbons. And then you got little prizes and finally scholarships. And so I love the promotion of science in our public schools. I think that that's incredibly important. And I try to give back. I try to talk with middle schoolers and high schoolers about careers in science as frequently as possible. We have programs through the Child Health Research Institute to do that on a regular basis. It's part of our mission as well. And then as a clinician, you can't help but ask questions. We don't know so much about health and illness in pediatric populations. And you just want to know those answers so you can do the best for your patient. And so we have to do research. It's just, it's an essential part of the care and well-being of the pediatric population to do research in child health. So I'm honored to be a part of that in my own lab group. I work with Dr. Corinne Hansen, Dr. Melissa Taney, and several others. And I'm honored to have this role as the Executive Director of Child Health Research Institute so that I can help others to be successful as well.
Dr. Anderson-Berry, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule.
It's just been a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope your viewers find a little bit of interest in what we've talked about today. It's exciting to me, so I go on forever, but I do think it's impactful for the health of our kids, and I really appreciate the opportunity today.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another Talking Research. Take care.